To quote somebody on X, formerly Twitter, how does Margaret Atwood come up with all this weird shit? And I replied, it is not I who comes up with this weird shit, it is the human race. In the United States right now, things are crumbling a lot faster. Did my smart mouth get me into trouble? Of course. Is it still getting me into trouble? Of course. But, what's life without a little trouble?
Hey there, it's Fatima. I recently sat down with legendary Canadian author Margaret Atwood, best known for The Handmaid's Tale, the novel that became a hit TV series set in a dystopian, totalitarian, theocratic America. But her work goes far beyond that. She's written more than 60 books across fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. I had the joy of reading her newest release, Book of Lives, a Memoir of Sorts, and even got to speak with her on her 86th birthday. Let's get into it. C'est parti. So, the memoir starts off with a couple of quotes. One in particular comes from your father, and he says, "One of these days, that smart mouth of yours is going to get you in trouble." Do you think that label as a child helped propel you into this career?
Right. I was a teenager, and you know what they're like. So, did my smart mouth get me into trouble? Of course. Is it still getting me into trouble? Of course. But, what's life without a little trouble?
In the book, you mention the Salem witch trials quite often. I learned that you keep an entire section in your home library dedicated to that. And I'm curious, how did you get interested in this subject?
I'm allowed to talk about these people because some of them were my ancestors. So my relatives are crawling all over Cape Cod. And this particular family was called Webster in the 17th century. My grandmother was a Webster. The one that I was most interested in was a woman called Half-Hanged Mary. Half-Hanged Mary was accused of witchcraft just before the Salem event and was hauled off to Boston, put on trial, was exonerated, let her off. She goes back to Hadley, and the townspeople don't like the verdict, so they hang her anyway. What were they accusing her of? They were accusing her of making an old man extremely valetudinarious, which means making an old man old. We're responsible for that. What can I tell you? So they hanged her, but they hadn't invented the drop, which breaks your neck. So they just hauled her up like a flag. She was hanging there all night. They came in the morning to cut her down, and she was still alive, and that's why she's called Half-Hanged Mary. So I did write a suite of poems about her, wondering what she was thinking all night. What a story.
In the memoir, you also talk a lot about growing up in the Canadian wilderness for a part of your childhood, because your father studied insects.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know, do you think having a parent that was an entomologist changed the way that you went about researching for your books?
Some books, definitely. So the Mad Adam trilogy, very, very useful. And observing in general, you observe particularly rather than generally. So not a tree, that tree. Not a fish, that fish. And not people in general, that person. So if you think I haven't noticed what you're wearing, you're quite wrong.
In previous interviews, you have mentioned that you only write about what has already happened in history. And I learned that you keep extensive archives of your research. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, it used to be paper. Everything used to be paper. So we've got those paper ones. Now, of course, we do a lot of research on the internet, and I do that just the same as everybody else. And if it's particularly useful, I will print it out and save it. But why did I not put anything into the Handmaid's Tale that didn't have a precedent in history? Because I didn't want people saying Margaret Atwood just made all this up. So everything is based on something that some human being did or some human beings did at some time to other human beings. And it's autour du monde, it's around the world. It's from many periods of history, or to quote somebody on X, formerly Twitter, how does Margaret Atwood come up with all this weird shit? And I replied, it is not I who comes up with this weird shit, it is the human race. So that's why I took care to annotate everything, particularly awful things that I put into The Handmaid's Tale. We've done it before, we could do it again. I never believe anyone who says it can't happen here, because anything can happen anywhere given the circumstances.
At one point in your memoir, you also mentioned that you spent a good amount of time worrying about evil political behavior.
I did.
You often write about how people live in these environments.
Yes, how do they live through them?
Yes.
How do they behave in relation to them?
Mm-hmm.
But remember when I was born. I was born in 1939, 2 months after World War II started, so I've always been interested in these subjects. How does a country switch so quickly from becoming a liberal democracy into becoming a totalitarian dictatorship? So how does this all unfold? I was then 16 at the time of the Hungarian Revolution, which was a big event for my generation, and my interest in human rights probably starts from then. So lots of reading about Stalin, Mao, Hitler, Ceausescu, Pinochet. There's a lot of them. They don't usually last. Sometimes they last longer than you might think, but they usually crumble from inside. And that is what the Testaments is about, the beginning of that crumbling. So I would say in the United States right now, things are crumbling a lot faster than people at first feared. What do you think of that?
Recently, I was in a bookstore and I was attracted to a table that had a copy of Orwell's 1984, Octavia Butler's The Parable of the Sower,
Yes.
and your book,
Mm-hmm.
The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes.
And then afterwards, I saw that it was actually a section for the most commonly banned books in the U.S. And I was a bit disappointed to see that, personally. And I know you've written about this in The Atlantic. You did a really impressive video where you were trying to torch an unburnable copy of The Handmaid's Tale. Now that we're in 2025, these efforts are still ongoing.
Oh, sure.
And I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the history of book banning goes way, 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 way back. You could even take it back to Plato. You could take it back to the Chinese emperor who burned all books before his time because he wanted to be the only person in history. The history of defacing statues of people you've deposed is very long. There was a lot of iconoclasm that took place during the Christian takeover. Any regime that wants total power does this. And if they really get going, they also execute artists, shoot writers, imprison people, exile them. So how much free speaking is a society going to allow? That's the question. Everybody has a line. And I would say the line in liberal democracies is usually child. Like, okay, anything above this line, we're going to permit that, but below that line, no. I'm of a generation in which Lady Chatterley's Lover, which seems pretty vanilla at the moment, was banned. And there was recently an attempt made in Alberta, Canada to ban, get this, books with direct or indirect sex in them. What is indirect sex? Very interesting question. That lasted 2 days because the Albertans, whatever else you might think about them, don't sit still for people telling them what to do. And neither do the Americans, as you have recently seen with the No Kings protests. And the latest news is 30 white evangelical pastors are running for the Democrats because they feel their churches have been betrayed by Trump. That's new. So, no, I haven't given up hope. No, I haven't counted the Americans out. And I'm watching their pushback with great interest because, need I add, Canada does not wish to be the 51st state.
Speaking of The Handmaid's Tale, there's a part that sticks out to me, and it's when Offred is describing the takeover of the U.S. government. She's describing portable money, the suspension of the Constitution, the lack of rioting in the streets, and the indifferent or rather perhaps apathetic response of the masses. And there is a line that you write in the book: people stayed home at night, watching television, looking for some direction. And in 2025, I can't stop thinking about the parallels between the fact that we are moving towards a cashless society. We have the Patriot Act in the US. Just a couple of months ago, parts of the online constitution were taken off the Library of Congress's website. Essentially, in today's digital age, I'm curious if you had any ideas on how this might play out.
In the book, Congress gets assassinated, like mowed down. You saw an attempt at that, which didn't succeed, but it almost did. As for, and other people said to me, why weren't there any protests, etc.? And I said, because this was a real totalitarianism, and in a real totalitarianism, they shoot people like that. That hasn't happened yet, so they're shooting things at them, but they're not yet Tiananmen squaring them. They're not yet just mowing them down. Well, I think present administration is looking for any excuse to do that. So, but they haven't done it yet. And I think we're at a moment when that is becoming somewhat less likely. So at the beginning of this, people were so petrified and shocked, really, that they didn't know how to respond. But I think you see a lot more response coming now. So it'll be interesting to see how far the present regime is willing to go in imposing its will. The base seems to be splitting, and one half is saying we need the Epstein files, and the other half is saying anybody who wants to see them as a traitor, having called for seeing them for years. Yeah, so your guess is as good as mine. I don't know which way the cat will jump, but none of this is good for the United States. It seems to be abdicating its leadership of the free world.
Now that Roe versus Wade has been overturned, what do you think is next? What do you think is on the chopping block?
Well, let's just talk about the effects of Roe versus Wade being overturned. So essentially, they left it up to the states. And some states have kept women's rights in place, and others have negated them under the pretext that they love babies. Well, let me just say, it's better in Gilead in my book, because in Gilead they really do love babies.
Now I'm awake.
You girls will serve the leaders and their barren wives. You will bear children for them.
But any state that doesn't give any prenatal help to mothers, doesn't give them medical care, doesn't help them if they're bleeding out in parking lots, and doesn't give any financial support to people who can't afford to have that many children, doesn't love babies. And in my deepest, darkest imagination, it seems like, to me, like a plot to kill poor people. So in Gilead, you get 3 squares a day, nutritious food, good medical care. You don't get to keep the baby, but hey, they love babies. And, roof over your head and an outfit. Which would you say is better?
Speaking of what's going on right now, as we watch the second Trump presidency play out, what do you think we should be mindful of?
Well, I think you should be mindful of infringements on democracy, which are ongoing. And one of the first things that totalitarians like to do is seize control of media. But the other thing they really like to do is get hold of the judiciary and make the judiciary just a kind of third foot of the administration. So whatever the administration says, or to put it in simple terms, whatever Stalin says, the judges will vote on. If you've ever watched footage of the show trials in the 30s under Stalin, a lot of these people didn't even know what they were accused of. Yes, I did it. What is it? There's a novel called Darkness at Noon, which describes this process. So yeah, I'm very interested in that. I'm very interested in how people get brainwashed. But let us add that every time there's been a new communications medium introduced in society, it's always been disruptive. And that began with the invention of writing. It continued with the Gutenberg press, making reading available to many people, whereas before it had just been the purview of the elite. So every time it's happened, it's been disruptive. Radio is disruptive. I can hardly imagine Hitler without radio. Television, similarly, people used to be glued to their TVs like this. Whenever a new one comes online, everybody thinks it's the voice of God, which it never is. But they're hypnotized by it for a while, and then they lose the same intense interest in it that they had. Young people, I hear, are turning away from social media more than they were. Sorry to tell you that. So yeah, I'm watching it with great interest, and I'm wishing people well. It ain't over.
It ain't over.
No.
I really enjoyed the part of the memoir where you talked about palm reading and astrology. Thank you.
Your right hand is the hand you've played. Your left hand is the hand you were dealt. You're always going to have leadership abilities.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Lovely to speak with you. You don't have to broadcast your own palm reading.
Oh, no, I mean, I'm going to keep that for myself.